Welcome to the Paddle Like a Girl podcast. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Paddle Like a Girl podcast. Today we have Mercede Rogers. Mercede is a professional educator, lifelong canoe tripper, and a passionate outdoor leader. With a background in outdoor and experiential education and years of experience teaching middle school, she has dedicated much of her life to helping young people connect with nature. She has served as director of Camp Wapamio, overseeing over 60 canoe trips each summer. As a wilderness guide in all seasons, Mercede has worked with organizations such as Outward Bound, Camp Tamagami, Camp Tanamacoon, and MHO Adventures. She is the director at Camp Wanapate and sits on the board of directors for the Friends of Tamagami. As a mom of two young adventurers, Dylan and Jude, and alongside her husband Mike, they regularly take their family winter camping and on canoe trips, including 3-month-long journeys through the Tamagami region. Hello, Sadie. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Tori. Thanks for having me.
We've met a couple times in person, and I have always just admired your ability to take your kids out into the backcountry with such, I don't know, you just seem very calm about it and at ease about it. And I'm assuming that's because you grew up going canoe tripping. And so it is very natural for you. Can you share with us your earliest memories of canoe tripping?
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. Maybe I'm calm on the outside, but not always on the inside.
I know this
Yeah,
feeling.
I grew up in North Bay, and so the outdoors was just a part of life. And for kids in, the 80s and early 90s, being outside was very much a part of childhood. And I started going to summer camp at the age of 9, and that's when I first really became engaged in canoe tripping and what that looked like to be out there with other people your age, with male and female role models, other adults other than your parents that you have a chance to be with. And from there, I never really looked back. My mom sent me off for a month when I was 9 to Wapamio, which I ended up sticking around for many, many years. And yeah, that's how it kind of all began, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, you fell in love with it. You're still doing it today. So was there a particular moment on a canoe trip that really solidified your love for it?
Yes. Yeah. I think so that camp and a number of other amazing canoe tripping camps in Ontario do quite a lot of long canoe trips. And I remember the first time I did a canoe trip in Tamagami, I was probably 10 or 11. And I remember finishing a portage and we were going to load our canoes, and our staff member said, there were 3 other canoes coming towards us, and they said, you got to get out of the way, get out of the way. And, you're a little kid and you kind of scramble out of the way. And there were these 3 canoes coming towards us, like all in sync, and the most like beautifully dirty, strong people. And they just like hit the shore, were totally dialed in, threw their stuff on, and off they went. It was just like this flash. And I remember having the feeling of when I saw that, I remember feeling like I want to feel like how they look someday, if that makes sense. Like when you see
Totally.
it, you see that confidence, you see that strength, and that just the way that they were in their bodies. And I remember that. And every time I talk about that, it still like makes me a little bit tingly. And I remember feeling like I want to not just be a part of that as a camper, but I remember feeling like I wanted to be a part of that in a bigger way, that like to help other people feel that way, if that makes sense.
Okay. And so you're on canoe trips at the age of 10 at a camp with a bunch of other 10-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is so incredible. So, and now as the director of a camp, you're still sending 9, 10, 11-year-olds out on canoe trips.
Yeah. So
Okay.
the youngest kiddos that I've sent out have been 7, like 6
Okay.
or 7 between the 2 camps, and they'd go for 1 night or 2 nights, depending. And then like with Wanapate, where I am now, we take campers at age 7. And so that first age group, they go out for 2 nights or 3 nights between the ages of 7 and 9. And then at age 10, it progresses from there, right? They get a little bit longer every year. Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to hear that because I know obviously over time things change fairly drastically, and I know like a lot of the outdoor education programs and things like that are being removed or they're not funded, and so to know that there are still people who are dropping their 7-year-olds off and they know they're going to be in the hands of essentially a stranger to go out on these backcountry canoe trips. Do you find that people are fearful or hesitant to be dropping their kids off? Or are they just like, here you go, like have fun?
It really varies. I definitely have seen, as I think many people in the industry have, a difference in parenting. And as a parent, I can empathize with this of pre-COVID and post-COVID, of that feeling of having your family being far away from you, and at a young age. And there's definitely, when they're coming at age 7 to 9, they can come for 1 week or for 2 weeks, but that's still, it's far away and it's overnight. And what I'm finding now, more so than I'd say even like 5 or 10 years ago, is that oftentimes when the kids are coming, it might be it's their first time away from home. So, growing up having sleepovers or being able to go to a family member or friend's home to kind of practice that, I think that that's not a normalized part of the culture in the same way anymore. And so there is a lot of hesitation, rightfully so, from a lot of parents. And maybe it's also parents themselves haven't experienced it. So it's also new for them, right? If they were a parent that grew up in the camping system and had the privilege of being able to go to summer camp, that's something that they can speak to a little bit more, and they know the experience. But I am finding more and more new families are seeking out these opportunities for their kids, but they themselves are nervous about it because they've never experienced it. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's definitely a bit of both. And to be honest, it's all ages as well. It's not just
Yeah.
our young ones, but the young ones, especially for the canoe trip, that for a lot of people, that is a totally different comfort zone. Like people aren't yet prepared for that. And
Yeah.
that makes sense for some people for sure. And I think now being a parent and having kids around that age, it's given me a whole new perspective and understanding of what that feels like to give your child to another person for a little
Yeah.
while. So yeah, so I really I understand the hesitation sometimes, and know that they're putting a lot of trust in us,
Yeah.
which is pretty remarkable. Like it's
Yeah.
a really serious thing. It's something that we
Yeah.
feel really grateful for. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, big time for sure.
Yeah.
And so obviously all summer camps operate differently. So you are a canoe tripping summer camp. So not all
Yeah.
summer camps are running these big canoe trips. And so
Yeah.
if somebody is dropping their child off for 1 week, they would is how does it work? Like, is it centered around, okay, we're prepping for this canoe trip, you're going on the canoe trip and then you're unpacking kind of thing? Or what does it look like for them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because you're right. There is definitely some camps that are just doing an in-camp program, like you're coming to camp and maybe the canoe trip, maybe there isn't a canoe trip, or maybe that's a small component of what you do. And then there's other camps that do a hybrid, like a bit of both. And then
Hmm.
for us, the focus is the canoe trip. So if you're a camper, even up until your teens, if you're coming to us for 2 weeks, for 14 days, 10 of those days you're on canoe trip. So there's really only that little bit of prep at the beginning, the packing, the swim assessment, the med checks, the respect talk, the settling in, which happens quite quickly, and then the cleanup, celebration, kind of big event at the end and
Hmm.
big banquet. So there's not a lot of in between. With some of our kids, like the younger kids I mentioned, they're only on canoe trip for a couple of days. They have more time in camp. So we're very, very fortunate where we're located. I'm in Dakimanan, where we're on a huge beach. It's beautiful. There's lots of opportunities to play, be in the water, on the water, lots of field sports. We have a beautiful art and nature program. And so you've got some of those kind of classic, what you would think are like the quintessential summer camp
Yeah.
programs in a really
Hmm.
rustic setting. But the main focus is how are we helping people prepare and therefore be successful on their canoe trips.
Okay. I never had the opportunity to go to summer camps growing up.
Mhm.
And I know now as an adult, having gotten into canoe tripping and how much it has helped me just build confidence and so many other benefits. But I wish that I had the opportunity to go to summer camp. And so now for me, I think about my kids and I'm like, absolutely, if we can send them to a summer camp, whether it be a canoe tripping camp, which I think would
Mhm.
be amazing. But I have met other parents who are very much like, no, I would never send my kid to an overnight camp. And so
Mhm.
I guess I'm wondering what you might say to those parents. Like, what are the benefits that you're seeing in these kids that are coming through your camp?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and so important because I think it's very unique for each family as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do get calls like that, or I do have those conversations, I often start with trying to learn more about where the hesitancy is coming from. And is there some kind of barrier there that maybe we can help with? Is it that you're concerned about the staffing and how old they are and what their qualifications are and how are they really going to care for your child?
Mm-hmm.
Are you concerned that maybe your child has an exceptionality and you don't know how we can accommodate them? Is it that, socially they had a tough time at school this year and they need maybe a bit of extra care? Is it just literally a lack of understanding of what it is we do? Because I also find that that comes into play. Like when you say a canoe trip to some people or going camping, that means so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have that opportunity to have a bigger conversation, and I find trying to get at the root of where the hesitancy is and reinforce, like, so we've got some incredible policies, we have phenomenal staff members, go over what is the safety plan, what does that look like. A lot of people don't realize if their child is accessible to them, like to us when they're out there, or is there a communication device, what happens in emergencies. And I find if you're able to have those conversations, it helps alleviate it. Also, if they're able to visit, which is not, either virtually or actually go,
Mm-hmm.
that helps. Because even as parents, it's hard for us to picture where our kid is sometimes. It's like, well, where are they going to be sleeping? And what does that safe space look like for them when they're sleeping with other people at the same kind of space? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, trying to really communicate and get to the heart of like where the hesitancy is, I think would be,
Mm-hmm.
and for parents to ask hard questions of the camp too, right?
Okay.
That to really push them, because you want to be able to understand where you're sending your kiddo off to. um, Now I'd say also, financial barriers are huge for families, and summer camp is not, financially accessible to a lot of people. It's definitely can be considered a privileged thing. So I think trying to be really open about what assistance could look like for people as
Mm-hmm.
well is really
Yeah.
important, to try to get more kids out there, because that's something that for some families it's a non-starter right away. That
Mm-hmm.
they look at the website, maybe it looks wonderful, and then they look at the pricing and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't make that work.
Yeah.
And then that's where, I would hope they would be able to have an open conversation about, like, maybe there is help and support there to get their kid to camp.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even for myself, I was looking into summer camp for Wesley, and of course, he has
Mhm.
many additional needs. And so,
Mm.
but there's one in Huntsville that is specifically for children with additional needs, and I believe the ratio is one to like 2 to 1,
Mhm.
basically. So I was filling out all the forms, and they're asking all the right questions, like what his needs are, dietary restrictions, all the medication, everything, right?
Mhm.
But got to the end of the forums and I was like, I don't think I can do it. I know it would be beneficial for him for so many reasons, and also, as caregivers, we don't get a break really ever, right? So we might have a family member come up and help for a night or whatever, but Wesley has never been away from us for more than a night or two, really, and so beneficial on both ends. He would get to get outside and just have this whole new experience. But, I'm like, are they going to be able to do all the things that he needs? And I'm sure they would. It's a specialized summer camp. But
Mhm.
then, of course, the price at the end, you're committing to putting this much money up front, and then there's this much more. And I'm like, is the schedule going to work? Is it all, so
Yeah.
it can be definitely very, very intimidating.
Mhm.
Because you're trusting your child's well-being and the hands of people you've never met before, and a lot of them are probably pretty young. But
Mhm.
uh, the people who are working at the summer camps, typically, I'm going to assume they grew up going to these camps, and so what I know from, again, my experience going canoe tripping, just how much more knowledgeable I am and how much more capable I feel to handle certain adverse like situations. So the people who are now the camp counselors were most of them, I guess, students or kids that were attending the camp. And
Mhm.
what have they? Why would you say that they're capable of managing the types of trips that they go on and managing the kids who are attending the
Mhm.
camp?
I would say, in my experience with all of the different camps that I've worked with, when you're looking at canoe tripping camps in Ontario, yes, typically the leaders grew up or had some kind of connection with that camp, and that's why they're working there. For Wanapitei, we're fortunate. We have about 70 to 80 staff members, and our staff retention is wonderful. Our guides are returning every year. The ages of our staff are actually a little bit older than some of the other camps. So to be a staff member, you have to be turning 19, which in some other spaces that might be 16 or 17 or whatnot. But our campers are still campers until age 18. Like that's our bigger trips. So we're getting them as staff a little bit older. I'd say the average staff for us are mid 20s. So there's a little bit more of that judgment that's been developed, and that even just brain development, right? Like we're
Mm-hmm.
nearing that time where we're actually making our brain is fully developed.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what I find the staff that I work with is that they're such passionate leaders and guides that they're actually immersed in a paddling culture outside of camp as well.
Okay.
So many of them are guides in other organizations, run outdoors clubs at their universities. With the qualifications that we require them to have, they have to be immersed in paddling. They're
Mm-hmm.
increasing their certifications all the time, whether that's their wilderness first responder, whether that's pursuing a Paddle Canada instructor level course to be a leader on a certain trip. So they're very involved in the industry. And I think over time and just exposure, having been a camper, you're starting to develop that judgment and that ability to problem solve and that ability to read your environment from a young age, whether conscious or subconsciously, like that's happening, and you're
Mm-hmm.
developing those skills. And then as you're becoming a leader, we try to harness all of that into, okay, now from the leader perspective, what does safety look like? And these incredible certifications that they have help with that, right? Like they're practicing that all the time. So they can then also know themselves well enough that in times of adversity or in times of the thunderstorm or the big set that they're coming across or the dump or the mishap, they're used to working in that with their body feeling that way, right? Like whether that's
Mm-hmm.
their heart rate is elevated or they stress to them looks different because
Mm-hmm.
they have years of experience of managing groups of young people in that space. I mean, which is not to say it's not still stressful or challenging, but I think for our staff in particular, the strength of their certifications and their experience, but then also coupled with their co-leader, their ability to work together as a team. And that's something that we really focus on a lot, of just like open, honest feedback with one another for the purpose of growth and development, even for myself, right? Like we all engage in that really openly. And knowing that these campers, their well-being and their safety is at the core, um,
Mm-hmm.
is really, I think, a huge testament to like the staff's focus. And certainly growing up in that space, is wonderful. I do also really love when we're getting folks, and I did this as well. Like grew up at one place and then moved and went to a different camp for a little while, and being able to learn and be open to the way that different systems happen and different approaches to canoe tripping is incredibly valuable. And
Mm-hmm.
then being able to bring that back together and pick kind of the best training you've ever had or the best experiences you've ever had, and then that just makes you a better leader, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
that's always really valuable too when you do have folks that come from the outside, like that's
Yeah.
that's always a really nice thing too.
Yeah. You can learn from everywhere you go. So,
Totally. Yeah.
and apply what makes the most sense. And so I think just being exposed, like as a kid, nowadays kids are much more sheltered, we'll say, and a lot of screen time. There's a lot of the lack of just like social interaction because of screens, because of social media. And so just being at a camp and being outside and having to socialize and also being exposed to challenging situations that kids who have never been on a canoe trip or never been to summer camp likely aren't going to be exposed to really at any point in their childhood. So how do those experiences for even for people who don't go on to become like a camp counselor, how would those experiences benefit them later on in life when it comes to what career they're choosing and things like that?
Yeah, I think that more research has been done and will continue to be done around the benefits of that outdoor environment, and not just being exposed to the outdoor environment, but actually working in it or growing up, like prolonged exposure. And we, for people that maybe it kind of sounds like second nature, of course those skills are transferable, but the notion of working together with either people your age or, you know, older peers, mentors, adults, working together to overcome adversity, to overcome challenge, to work through conflict, I think is also really huge, because it just will happen naturally, right? We know being on a canoe trip, you don't need to plan for tough days. Like it can happen just regardless. So knowing that resilience that you're developing and that ability to communicate with other people, that ability to advocate for your own needs as well, right? Like the importance of self-care when you're out there, and to be able to say, like, know my body, know myself. When have I had enough? What does it look like to push me? And working, allowing other people to support you as well, where you can overcome something or you can work through something together, is incredibly valuable. And I think all of those skills can translate really easily into all aspects of life. How you develop relationships with other people, you know, what is it that you're valuing? A connection to place also for some people, and like you said, like not everybody grows up and goes to camp every year or goes on to become a leader, but there is, I think, so much value in having that exposure to the natural world and being able to be connected to something like that. And that's hugely valuable too. And knowing how you respond to stress and what you need in those moments, you know, as adults, I think a lot of us, like, we're still working on that. Like what is it that we need to do? But when you're confronted in also in a minimalistic space, right? Like you don't have necessarily a lot of tangible things available to you. How do you care for yourself and then care for others? And that's really important. I think you like developing that empathy, developing the judgment, knowing your physical self and being able to push limits, I think is huge, right? And I think one of the things, and this is what a lot of us say all the time, is like, you know, a lot of what we come across when we're out there is hard, and that's okay, because we can do hard things, and we should do hard things. And so in life, you know, when you're confronted with that like really big essay or that really big exam, I'm thinking when you're still a camper, all the way to like that really big job interview, it's like, yeah, this is going to be hard, and that's okay. Like I can do hard things. And then you draw on those resources and that toolkit that you've developed over time to be like, oh yeah, like this is like a walk in the park compared to that like 2 kilometer muddy portage I did in a thunderstorm or whatever it may be, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those were really good points, because I was thinking, you know, for someone like us, we take our kids canoe tripping and the goal is to continue taking them canoe tripping. And so the difference too between going canoe tripping with your family, with people you know and love and can really be vulnerable around and yourself around, there's a big difference between going canoe tripping with a camp. And like you said, like you have to advocate for other people. You have to be comfortable overcoming conflicts with people who are not your family members. And you know, they're not going to just love you unconditionally. And so there's a whole different aspect to development, I think, when it comes to canoe tripping with a camp, maybe instead of just canoe tripping with your family, which I guess are both obviously beneficial. And so, yeah, that was going to be my question, was like, what would you say are the major differences? Because, you know, we could probably just continue canoe tripping with the kids, and I do feel like they would gain a lot from those canoe trips, but there's a lot of reasons to also send them to a camp, even just for, you know, one canoe trip with a canoe tripping camp, and allow them to kind of build those those relationships, I guess,
Hmm.
with other
Hmm.
people who also have similar experiences, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that last point that you just said of like the ability to develop relationships with other people outside of their primary caregivers. Um, I I remember the first time I went to a parent teacher interview with my child, and the teacher was like talking to us about Dylan, and I remember like being really emotional. It was like, oh my gosh, like another adult like
Hmm.
cares for him and gets him and is supporting him and like is in his corner. And that was as a parent super I found super powerful. And I mean, you know, we take our kids on these trips and we hope that there's going to be something about it that they want to continue doing forever, right? And now for Dylan, he's at the age where he has been a camper for a couple of years, and definitely tough, right? That transition of like, but wait, I'm used to being out here with my parents. Um, but then I look at the way that these staff members like care for them and
Hmm.
the importance of having those role models outside of your parents that
Hmm.
even age wise, they're, you know, not that they're necessarily close in age, but they're certainly closer than their parents. And they step up in different ways, right? Like our kids react differently to different adults and definitely different, you know, compared to their parents. So to also give them the opportunity to find their own footing is I think really important. And hopefully they'll, I mean, for us personally, hopefully they'll find something that they gravitate towards and that they continue doing it. Um, as a family, we want to continue doing it for sure. Um, just because that's also how we like to spend our time. But
Hmm.
it's it's amazing to see how how other people can really, you know, support your kids too, and that's just a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're so afraid of any type of conflict too. Like, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I know I am just with friends and people who are not my family. It's hard to kind of overcome or just like have those hard talks, I guess, those challenging discussions and come out of it where your relationship is still intact. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like when you're on a canoe trip, you're forced to, like you said, work together and
Yeah.
work through your differences because it's like, hey, we got to get back still, so
Mm-hmm.
we need to get along and work together as a team and help each other, or this is going to fail. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that teaches a lot on how to just overcome conflict with someone who is not again, someone who's going to love you unconditionally, right? Because like
Mm-hmm.
with your mom, you can throw a temper tantrum and you can whine and whatever, and but you can't really do that with a camp counselor or your buddy over here. So
Mm-hmm.
makes a big difference, I think.
Mm-hmm. It does, yeah, and like giving them the experience of realizing that it's bigger than them.
Hmm.
So, like you mentioned, you know, some differences between doing it with your family and doing it with a camp, and the camp is it's a bigger entity, right? It's like we do have a route that we need to finish. We do have a day that we have to get back. Maybe we have a permit that we're supposed to be on this lake, and as a family, I mean, we travel differently. We give ourselves more time. We don't have the same kind of pressure. I mean, obviously there's an end at some point and there's a route, but we're not we're not bound by the same sort of program parameters that
Hmm.
you would be when you're a camper and at a camp. And so I think it's important to also see yourself in the world that you're one part of it and you're contributing to the overall functioning of a much bigger component. So you know your group success then leads into the whole place being successful. Whereas as families, like, yeah, if it's a really rainy day or something, maybe we're not going to trip today, or,
Hmm.
you know, if we're not feeling well, we're going to stop. And you don't always have the same kind of concessions when you're in a different program, I guess
Yeah,
would be one thing too.
for sure.
Mm.
Well, I definitely feel as though summer camp at any capacity is an important part of growing up. It just exposes you to things, and whether they like it or not, just like one small
Mhm.
experience would be good. But for folks who don't have access to like the funding for something like that, do you have any recommendations for them, different avenues that they can take, or just ways that they can do their best to give their kid a similar experience without actually having to
Mhm.
send them to camp?
I think the funding part, I would hope that camps are making it easier for families to also even open that conversation, right? Because that's also a really vulnerable thing to say, like to contact a camp to say, we actually need some financial assistance. So to hopefully there's a way, that's maybe for us, it's like a checkbox of will I be pursuing financial assistance? And then we follow up with the family. And so we can start that conversation and say, hey, here are some things that we can do. There's a number of different bursary options that are out there that are applied to multiple camps. So camps might have their own internal kind of funding and support, but then there's also a number of them within Ontario and also Canada wide that you can apply to. And also for First Nation and Indigenous youth, often the band, or if you're looking at like Jordan's Principle, or there's often funding there for the Temagami Lake camps, and for our camp. Anyone that is First Nation from Temagami First Nation or Temiagama Anishinaabe is welcome to come to camp, and we cover the finances. Like we take care of that for them, and we have a similar program for any Indigenous youth across Canada. So I would say, like, don't stop at just looking at the price. It's very, very common for camps to also, I don't want to speak for all camps, obviously, but for us to modify payment plans as well. To be like, oh, okay, like final payment was due April 1st. Maybe we need to modify that for you. And maybe we need to modify the amounts that are coming out, and like either increase them or decrease them, or just we're happy to work with families to get them there, however we can. The other there's obviously a lot of barriers to it, for sure, and it is certainly remains a privileged thing, especially if you're looking at something like canoe tripping, or when you're getting into the big trips, right? Like we're talking about like thousands and thousands of dollars, and that's huge. So as a family, starting out small. And I think, you've talked about this before too, of just looking even locally where you can get out with your family. Maybe that starts with hikes. Maybe that starts with just going for walks in the neighborhood, or finding green spaces where you live. Because I would say, we know population wise, the majority of folks living in Southern Ontario, you are going to have some form of transportation to get into the deeper parts. So how do you do that? Like there are some amazing provincial parks that you can engage with, and that for a lot of folks is a great stepping stone before you head into a more remote or isolated space. So seeking out like the resources to ask where to go, I think is really important. And also how do we doing that? Like you as a person, do you feel comfortable with your skill set? Because that's the other thing. Like I think, for you and I, and even for, our husbands, like there's a skill set there that I recognize for Mike and I is not the same for other folks, that some of the things that we do is not going to sound attainable for other people. And that's okay. So just kind of knowing what your own comfort level is with your kids, and taking it a step at a time, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I think Ontario or Algonquin or some of the Ontario parks have the Learn to Camp program, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, which is, yeah, your basics, like set up a tent and set up your campsite, which is a great place to get started. For folks who are kind of beyond the country camping, but they're afraid to take the first step to go backcountry with their kids,
Mm-hmm.
what suggestions would you give them to get started?
Yeah. One thing that came to mind is that there are a number of camps, ours included, that also offer family camp options. So where the whole family could come and you can experience what summer camp is like. And for us, we have a canoe trip component built into that. So our staff members are fully taking care of the whole program. So it's for you and your kiddos, and we'll take you out on trip. And so
Nice.
there's some places that might do things like that so that it helps support everybody in learning those skills. For some adults, and I know that you do a great job of this, of like trying to encourage people to develop their own skill set and either get some certifications or spend some time on the water and learn the proper way to be doing things so that we can be traveling more safely. So that would be really good too. But yeah, looking at maybe there's another family that you could group up with that maybe they could share that. Asking for, like, looking at rentals for some equipment instead of having to buy everything on your own is huge, or like looking at gear swaps, or even that looking at those parks where you can rent a space at the park and then hike into a site or something.
Right. Yeah.
Because it can feel big, right? To like start out of like, how do I
Yeah.
do this? Like, how do I start from scratch? So definitely looking at those resources and looking at the folks around you, and asking what they're doing.
I mean, there's definitely different routes you can take, like as far as ways to get out with your kids, but it can be extremely overwhelming. And I think that's honestly the biggest, just that's the barrier is just like, I'm afraid to start. And I think just starting really, really small. Can you, I think something that I struggle with, people are always asking me, what I use for the kids in the backcountry. And I guess people kind of look to me like as an expert with backcountry tripping with kids. But the reality is, maybe more so for me than for you, because I have Wesley who has different needs than Hudson. So going canoe tripping now with Hudson, who's 3, is a totally different experience than going with Wesley when he was 3, right? So Hudson, who's running away full speed and like just, each summer is different. So people are like, how do you go canoe tripping with, a baby? And meanwhile, it's my first baby or whatever it is, you know what I mean? So it's like, I mean, I'm just sort of figuring it out myself, but I can definitely share tips that worked for me. But can you share some tips? And again, every summer is different because they're so drastically different each
So
summer.
different.
A year makes a huge difference. So what are some tips or things to look for with campsites maybe, and some gear that you found like really important and are good to share with others?
Yeah. I've thought about that a lot for you guys, and for us too. Like you said, like it's like you're unlocking new levels all the time of like,
Yeah.
what's the next challenge going to be? And like, how do I do this? And I remember our first big trip with Dylan, like our first month long when we just had him, he wasn't yet walking, and it
Okay.
was awesome. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is great. Like he's crawling and he's like
Yeah.
bear walking everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. But then as soon as he started walking, I was like, oh, whole new ball game, like whole new
Yes.
set. Um, I think for us, it starts even before going out there of like having those conversations with the person that you're going with to be like, okay, like what is our limit and what is the goal? Like what are we aiming for? So for us, we knew we were looking at, planning routes that would get us to campsites that were typically more like low lying, not like big rocky cliffy campsites. We're looking more for like flat spaces, especially for when they're younger. What does the access to the water look like? Can we actually supervise? Because really, one person, there's a lot of work to be done, and it does come down to one person is going to be primarily taking and caring for the kiddos, especially when they're young. And so there's always has to be eyes on. So can the other person actually do everything that else that needs to be done? So
Right.
if that means, you're not comfortable sourcing your own firewood, maybe you need to look at stoves instead. Or if you're not comfortable preparing your own food, look at pre-made stuff. Like set yourself up for success more and try not to bite off more than you can do. Like we learned that, typically it was small child in the bow with me. And I know that this has happened with you too. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I can't paddle anymore because this
Yeah.
little person needs me. So can the person in the stern manage that and have you, stayed close to shore and made sure that you're not paddling? For us, we realized like more than an hour paddling, we needed to get to shore. Like we needed to break up the activity, right?
Yeah.
And what activities do you have for them in the canoe? Like we had one kiddo that, like Dylan, never fell asleep in the canoe. He would stand holding the gunnel, looking over the side constantly, throwing in like tons of pine cones, tons of rocks, whatever. Whereas Jude would fall asleep in the bow and I'd be able to paddle or something. So every kid is going to be different, like you said too. But yeah, having those conversations with who you're going out there with, and then trying to simplify everything, like setting yourself up. Tents are playpens, right? So we would always like get the tent set up and not really unpack anything in it, but just let them play on the thermarests, let them play on the sleeping bags. Like they're safe, they're fine, they're out of the bugs, like perfect. While maybe we have to go off and do something else. Yeah, it's yeah, and then once they start moving, it is a whole different thing. We also, we'd have conversations like planning a route that had enough flexibility so that if we did run into bad weather, we wouldn't move. Like we'd stay. We're
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what? It's not worth getting freezing cold and getting everybody wet. We're going to stay for the night. We, especially, this is more, pertinent to the longer trips. We purposely planned to stay everywhere for 2 nights so
Mm-hmm.
that we also weren't packing up every day, because the amount of work and the added level of stress for us, that just helped keep us cool too. That it was like,
Yeah.
oh, we're just going to stay put. And if you find a place that you love, I remember we got to Pine Torch Lake and we had a beautiful campsite. We're like, we're staying. We stayed for like 4 days. We're like, no, we're not
Yeah.
leaving. Like this
Yeah.
meets our needs. It's flat. Everyone needs to just take a break. So that, um, no big crossings, right? Like when you're looking at water and like how you're going to be managing your route. We decided for when they were young too, like we wouldn't do any moving water. Like that was just
Mm-hmm.
outside of, sometimes that happens if you're like ending up in a creek or whatever, but we weren't doing that. And um, yeah, a lot of it was trial and error. Like there's definitely things I would go back and do differently now. And I know this sounds really silly, but you'll probably understand what I mean. Like I was nursing our kids for a long time, and there's the classic, like there's two thermarests, and so they'd be on a thermarest and I'd be on another one, and I'm constantly like pulling the thermarest close to me so that they're not right on the ground. And
Yeah.
then I learned that there are double thermarests, and I was like, oh well, I would totally have gotten that. So looking at that, and so now we have a tandem sleeping bag, and I would have a double
Yeah.
thermarest, and then I can be cozied up and do what I need to, right? um yeah, thinking about the diapers too. I don't know what you guys did with
Oh,
diapers,
yeah.
but how you're gonna wash and how you're
Yeah.
gonna to do that and make sure that like not everything smells like pee all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
All the time.
And there comes a point where you're like, everything smells like pee.
Everything.
You're just like, whatever it
Everything.
is. It is what it is at this point.
No, I have a very vivid memory of being on Ferguson Lake in Temagami, and it was raining, and it was one of those times where it was like, I'm soaking wet, they're soaking wet, everything smells like pee. I will never be dry again. Like when you
Yeah.
have those moments yourself where you're like, this is it. I'm never going to be dry and not smell like pee. And then you stop and you kind of like take inventory and slow down a little bit. And you're like, okay, we can do this. But yeah, it's you catch yourself, and I think giving yourself a lot of grace too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like being really gracious with yourself of like, okay, sometimes this is tough. I mean, and kids, Mike and I were talking about this last night of like some of the challenges. I think we would have faced a lot of those challenges no matter where we were, because kids are kids. So
Mm-hmm.
someone's going to be upset at some point. Somebody is going to be hungry when another's not, or someone's going to need to pee when you're in the middle of the lake. Like someone's going to not want to nap. And so you find yourself in the tent for longer than you thought. Like those are things that we'd be facing at home as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So trying to keep perspective too,
Yes.
um,
Big time.
is hard, but
Mm-hmm.
then hopefully at some point you get a bit of a reprieve and can sit around the fire and
Yeah.
have a drink or have a just relax.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's important to just kind of reiterate what you said is be flexible. Like
Mhm.
you can't you have to be flexible with your kids at home, and you definitely have to do it on a canoe trip, because it's your safety is involved, because if you start rushing because you have this really tight deadline. So I've never considered, as part of the advice to others who are looking to go camping with kids, is the being aware that one of you is likely 100% of the time going to have to be with the kids. So like watching them, holding on to them, feeding them, whatever it is. And the other one has to be able to manage whatever camp tasks need to be done. And so that alone, just timing wise, that's going to slow you down significantly if you only have one person,
Yeah.
when you typically have two who are
Yeah.
breaking camp, setting up camp.
Yeah.
That doubles the length of time that
Yeah.
it takes. And then therefore dialing back how far you plan to paddle each day.
Mhm.
And also just, again, being able to, okay, you know what, let's just pull over early today. No, we're not having a good paddling day. The kids aren't into it, whatever it is. And just
Yeah.
realizing why you're even doing it in the first place. Like, make
Yeah.
sure you're doing it for the right reasons. You want to be out there with your kids and enjoying time with your kids. And if you're like
Mhm.
just angry at your kids because they're not letting you catch up to where you need to be, it's like, well, maybe this isn't the kind of trip you should be doing with the
Yeah.
kids, right?
Yeah.
So
I
flexibility is very key.
we constantly learn from children, whether they're our own or people's kids that we're caring for. And I think those are really good reminders of like what is important and what is our purpose out here. And then the practical thing, like as I was hearing you, and I was thinking like, oh, I guess another thing too that you could do, like if you're starting to think about what's actually attainable for you, maybe portaging isn't part of it. Maybe you're starting with just going campsite to campsite on one lake.
Yeah.
And because the portaging, like for us in particular, we were 5 trips across a portage and the kids counted as one trip.
Right.
But then that means like physically as well, the other person or whomever, however you're splitting that up, there's a lot more time that's happening. And like, there's a huge system that has to be in place to be efficient on that, and effective, and also not to wear yourself out, because that's also not the purpose, right? Like at the end of the day, do you want to be completely worn out and not have anything left in your tank to actually enjoy where you are? Yeah, that's tough too, Tori, because then you have to be honest about your own abilities and what you're wanting to take on. And I think it's really okay to just say like, yeah, maybe we just want to hang out here and play in the water because we're at a really great beach, and let's just do that.
And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter when it comes to the kids and their development
No.
and what's beneficial for them just being outside. So if you paddled a kilometer from the put in
Yeah.
and you stay at that one campsite, do you think they're going to know the difference between that campsite and one that's 5 portages in? They're outside, they're exploring, they're with their family, like it's all beneficial. So I think there's that level of, like you said, like really being honest with yourself at your ability levels, and just also just what you want to do. We don't need to be proving anything to anybody except just getting out there, really. So can you talk a little bit about kids' comfort levels? I'm curious to get your take on this because I don't really know how to explain it, and so you'll probably do a better job than I do. But I think about, like you were mentioning, oh, like I'm wet and I smell like pee and I'm just going to be wet forever. And as an adult, if you've never experienced that growing up, like if you've never went camping, you never had to paddle in the rain, you didn't have a day where you were just damp all day. As an adult, you're like, this sucks. I'm so uncomfortable. I'm cold. And whereas kids, like they don't really care if they're soaking wet all day, as long as they're not cold, or if they're dirty, their hands are dirty, they've got dirt all over the face. They don't care unless somebody's like constantly fussing with them and making them realize that, oh, maybe this should be uncomfortable. Can you kind of maybe explain that a little bit better for me?
Oh, I think that's it. I think we all, and kids especially, are taking cues from the adults around them, right? Like they're learning from what they're seeing, whether that's our attitude, our behavior, to even what we're wearing. So if we're modeling to them that, oh, it's starting to drizzle, I'm going to put my raincoat on now because I don't want to get wet later. Over time, you start seeing their decision making starting to mirror, hopefully, what it is that you're doing. And you're, for some ages, yes, we are going to be dictating it for the child. Now, as our kids get older, we're looking for those opportunities that they can make some of those decisions themselves and also learn. And you have to decide what's a good learning and teachable moment of, low risk, low consequence. Like if they're here and playing at home and it's raining and they don't put their raincoat on and they're outside for 15 minutes, they're going to get wet. Maybe they'll get upset. And you're like, okay, it's okay. You're safe. You're warm. But out there, especially when you're out there, further away, more isolated, or out there for a longer period of time, sometimes like we have to be the ones acting as that prefrontal cortex for them because they can't do that decision making. So that is tough when it's like, no, we actually have to put this on for you. So there is that balancing act.
Yeah.
I always find like snacks just help no matter what. It's like, let's all just take a pause. And while they're snacking, I might be like changing their socks or just double checking that they're not cold. And because as you said, like even Dylan came home yesterday, his boots were soaking wet.
Yeah.
His feet were soaked. He's walking. I was like, why is the floor wet? Like your socks are so wet. Could have like, didn't care. So finding that balance of like when we have to step in, and then just looking after those basic needs, because we have had really cold kids on trip, like especially with some of our winter camping things, like some of the lessons for us, it was like, okay, they're not producing the same amount of heat that I am right now. Or, Mike's been chopping wood for half an hour, so he's taken his sweater off, but our
Hmm.
kiddo can't because they're not exerting the same amount of energy. So um, having that balance, I don't know if that totally answers your question,
Yeah.
but food always helps. And then just those basic needs, like, are they warm? Sometimes it's just like a diversion, right? You're singing a goofy song, or you're, you know, making something out of pine cones and trying to get their minds off of it. And
Yeah.
then checking yourself, like that goes back to, I know it's kind of that analogy of like you put your own oxygen mask on before others, but there have been times where it's like, okay, I didn't do a good enough job of caring for myself, and I just pushed it, and now my hands are freezing cold and I actually can't
Hmm.
tie these knots. I actually need to stop for a second.
Yeah.
I've given the kids a snack, they're fine. I have to spend 5 minutes like readjusting what I'm doing so that I'm in a better position to care for them and do
Yeah.
something for them. And that's a hard thing for, maybe it's not a hard thing for everybody, but to recognize that we do still have to really be caring for ourselves as well.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, you can have your moments of like, I'm wet and everything smells like pee, but maybe like away from, yeah, yeah. We had
Yeah.
this, we were on this one portage. Oh my gosh, it was so muddy. It was incredibly muddy, and it was really really long. And this was when Jude was still on my back, and Dylan was, the like log hopping, like navigating the mud like really really well. And he tripped. He doesn't often fall. He has pretty remarkable balance. And he looked at me and he swore. He was like, "I hate this effing mud." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And in that moment, all I could do, I was like, "Me too, buddy." Like, yeah, I also am feeling that way. Oh my goodness. Yes, you actually just said exactly how I was feeling. I'm like, yep, yep, that's a thing too. Like, sometimes it's hard for everybody.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then also again, modeling after you, like, yeah, you hate it too, but I'm powering through. And that's how they
Here
learn
we
that
are.
we can do hard things.
Hmm.
It's just such an
Hmm.
important lesson to learn at a young
Hmm.
age.
And that they're still safe and they're still cared for, and right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think there's a balance between like what's just discomfort and then what is like this is unsafe, like okay, I can be a little cold, sure,
Yep.
that's fine, but at what point is it okay, well now this is bordering on I'm starting to show the symptoms of
Yeah.
hypothermia, so
Yeah.
just understanding that difference there
Hmm.
is really
Hmm.
important.
I think that's a really, really important thing to emphasize. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that could be like physical as well as emotional, right?
Hmm.
That like being a human being is uncomfortable at
Hmm.
times, guaranteed. Being a human being means like we will have feelings of nervousness and anxieties and feelings of overwhelm, and that is a natural thing. And you're right. What is the difference between this is actually outside the realm of what's manageable, or outside of the realm for even as the individual of what you're
Hmm.
able to cope with, and what's not? Because you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Yeah, you're cold right now, but
Hmm.
we've got the fire going, so give yourself a couple of minutes. Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
really really important. I don't want to scare people off, but like it. I mean, it can be tough, right? Like what we do, what you choose to do. And when I think about some of the adventures that you and Jim are on, it's not for the faint of heart. But you don't have to, like we're saying, like it doesn't have to be in that way. I think we sometimes are choosing to do things that are, you know, more challenging.
Yeah, and even myself after doing the trips with the kids, especially after the last one. I mean, okay, so Wesley had seizures on the last day of our trip, which was thankfully on the last day, but like you said, like they're going to have a meltdown at home or they're going to have a meltdown out here. He's not having a seizure because he's on a canoe trip.
Right,
So it's
right.
like it's understanding like, well, this would have happened at home and sure it's like would have been easier to, but we live already 45 minutes from the nearest hospital that doesn't have a
Hmm.
pediatrics unit anyway, and then it would be a helicopter or airplane or whatever to get him to
Yeah,
an actual
yeah.
pediatric hospital. So we're 2 hours from a pediatric hospital, right? So it's like to put into context of, yeah, like you might, especially because we film things and put it online. So it is opening it up to people who really have no idea about backcountry canoe
Yeah.
tripping, and of course people who do, but the people who just see this at first glance, they think, oh, well, that's happening because you took him out here into the middle of nowhere and it's traumatizing for him or something like that. But the
Mhm.
reality is like that was outside of our control, and it just so happened that it was on a canoe
Mhm.
trip. Could have been
Mhm.
2 days later when we were back in Whitehorse. Could have been 2 days before when we were a couple days up the river. So thankfully it wasn't a life-threatening situation, and it is scary. But the reality is like kids are kids. They're going to be kids at home. They're going to be kids in the backcountry,
Mhm.
and it's just being
Mhm.
aware of how to handle situations.
Mhm.
For me, all this was to say, for me, after that experience, and also our Stikine River, which wasn't was terrible weather the whole time, which really
Yeah,
literally dampened the whole experience because it
that
rained every
looked
day pretty much.
really tough.
Yeah, and so those two on the Teslin River, I was saying to Jim, like, I think this is the last one for Wesley. Like, this is,
Mhm.
I'll do 5 days and closer to home. But I'm like, I even because it was before he had the seizure. I was
Mhm.
saying to Jim like a few days before, because it's a lot feeding him and just a typical child. They can tell you, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I need to go to the washroom. Like they're
Mhm.
communicating with you. But for Wesley, he can't, right? So it's a
Mhm.
lot of just constant checking.
Yeah.
What does he need? Is he okay? When he's upset, it's like, why is he upset? Okay, he's not cold. He's just
Mhm.
ate. And so
Mhm.
it's more stressful than enjoyable for me at a certain point where I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not really enjoying myself anymore, and I can't experience this the way that I should be experiencing this river. And
Yeah.
for me, my top priority is like Wesley's safety and well-being, and he's safe out there. He's fine. It's just me being like a paranoid, worrying
I
mother.
I don't think paranoid and worrying. I think you're 100% doing exactly what parents do, right?
Hmm.
You our prime we're caring for our kiddos, and that is so mentally exhausting.
Hmm.
And for you to be able to say, "Hey, this is what I'm able to do or what I'm willing to do right now so
Yeah.
that I can also continue to enjoy it." Like that takes a lot of bravery, and I think that's really really important because we also have to know like that the amount of energy and that mental load for you would be incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even with our kids, no matter where we are, every time like we tend to start and end our big trips out of the same place in Temagami, and when we get back to the lake where I know we don't have any more portages or I know I'm within 2 hours, like I feel my body change in
Hmm.
that we all just finished that portage, all of our stuff are here, we're we're good. We're
Yeah.
okay. Like
Yeah.
we're not like you said, not that we were unsafe, but
Yes.
knowing that there is still risk in what we do.
Hmm.
And when you have kids, there's more things that might be more unpredictable
Hmm.
than with adults sometimes. And yeah, you have that like sense of relief. I know it's always, we get to Wikimika and it's like, okay, whew, we're here. Like
Yeah.
we can be back at the car in 2 hours if we need to, or whatever it might be, right? Like
Yes. Yeah.
you just it is because it's exhausting,
It's exhausting.
mentally
Yeah.
and physically and hopefully extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah, good for you for also just recognizing like and maybe that it shifts at some point, but no, we have those conversations too. Like I think it's almost every trip we go on, we're like, okay, should we be doing this or like we're never doing this again or like
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
remember one winter trip and we're trying to untie everything and the temperature in in the truck said -29 and it was like what? Like wait a second, is this actually
Oh
like
my
what we
gosh.
signed up for? Yeah, there's a lot to manage, I think,
For
for sure.
sure. Yeah. And again, it just goes back to like remembering why you're doing it. And so that was, I think, the point that I was at on the Tesla. I'm like, I'm not relaxed at any point until like we are at camp and the kids have finished eating and like everything's set up and everyone's dry, warm by the fire, and it's like we are done. Like
Mhm.
everything's cleaned up in that's like the moment that I'm relaxing
Yeah.
after that. And so but then I'm exhausted and then I'm like I got to go to
Mhm.
sleep now. And then it
Yeah.
starts over again. And so I'm like I'm happy to bring him. I know it's really good for him, but I just those trips need to look a little bit different, I think, is
Mhm.
all it is.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And I find the load that each person is carrying is very different, right?
Hmm.
Like I remember one of our trips at the beginning, the first couple of portages, our gear was so heavy that,
Hmm.
there was a huge literal physical weight for Mike.
Yeah.
And we had those conversations of sharing what each of us are holding on to. And it's
Yeah.
like, maybe I'm stressed out because she's not feeding properly, or they haven't had a bowel movement in however long or whatnot, but
Yeah.
then also recognizing that the person you're doing it with is also carrying a load of, do we have enough firewood, or what does
Yeah.
tomorrow look like, or so it's, yeah, you really have to have those honest conversations about what is the goal and how do we can achieve that goal of being together as a family outside in
Hmm.
so many different ways,
Hmm.
in so many
Yes.
different ways.
Yeah.
And so if that's our goal, that we want time together as a family in the places that we love, that can look like all sorts of things.
Which I guess, brings us to your cabin. I mean, you have an off-grid cabin in Northern Ontario, and so I don't know if that was kind of if that was after Dylan was born, and that was a decision. Well, okay, maybe we need to dial it back, or just have a different option to
Mm.
still be immersed in nature, but have this kind of safe space. When did you
Yeah.
decide to build this cabin?
We have always, Mike's from Sudbury. Like I said, I'm from North Bay. And he grew up having an off grid cabin in the middle of nowhere. And to be honest, we want to live in a space like that.
Hmm.
And so it was always a future goal to be able to have that kind of an environment. And for us, it is where we are our most authentic selves, I would say, like where we're
Hmm.
most comfortable and where we are just the most relaxed and being able to be out there and be connected with the land. So it allows us having being able to spend the summer at Wanapate and then have this kind of outpost space to be able to go to. It does allow us a lot more freedom of movement and options and accessibility in different seasons as well.
Yeah.
So like you said, of like maybe come wintertime, or like I said, maybe we're not interested in camping at minus 29, but we would be comfortable going to, an off-grid space that we can heat at minus
Yeah.
29, where we can show up and already have
It's
that
there.
space available to us.
Yes.
So that's where we're just able to use it differently. It was always a goal to be able to have that. And we feel so fortunate and unbelievably grateful that we have those different spaces that we can
Hmm.
branch out to. Um, and and that I think is just trying to be really always be really grateful for that, and then just making the most of the time that we're able to be out there and doing that. Um, yeah, because it helps you, and again, not available to everybody I know, and it's a far
Yeah.
drive. You guys are probably used to some pretty long drives too, and but always feels worth it, and it takes off some of that pressure to be able to
Hmm.
have the space. I mean, there's different
Yeah.
challenges in accessing it, and I know it's similar for you guys. Of like, okay, even getting there is a
Yeah.
challenge,
It's an
but at
adventure to get
least
there.
right. But at least once you're there, it's like, okay, I can actually check some of these other stresses off my list because
Yes.
we're we're a little bit more taken care of in some ways.
Yeah, we just got this off-grid cabin last year, and so
Mhm.
I feel similar in a way of like, first of all, it's a bit of an adventure to get there. It's water access, and then also in the winter, it's you're on a snowmobile, so like feels like okay, we just did a lot of work to get here. Now I can relax and feel like really deserving of this relaxing
Mhm.
time. But just it's interesting because I think you're similar. You live on a rural, like I think a pretty large waterfront property,
Mhm.
like full time.
Yeah.
And so for that alone, for a lot of people, would be a great way to be immersed in nature. But it's totally different when you live there full time because you're working, you've got all your regular day to day life things that you need to do. So you're not getting to get outside in the same way that you might do so at your off grid cabin when there's
Mhm.
not much to do inside. It's a small
Mhm.
space. There's no power really. I don't know if you
Mhm.
have like solar there or not, but like yeah, there's no power. There's no TVs, there's nothing keeping you inside. And so
Mhm.
it's very much like wake up, maybe eat breakfast and go outside because
Yeah.
that's what there is to do. And then so
Mhm.
it does make it that much easier because you still have the comforts of home. You've got, a wood stove in there and like your beds and things like that. So it's still super comfy, but then you're forced to get outside. And it just
Mhm.
feels like a really safe and accessible way to be in nature, which is really
Mhm.
nice.
Mhm.
And again, we feel really lucky that we were able to buy this property too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because
yeah.
you're right. Like where we both do live, and it is really important to us that we're able and we are able to have this space for the kids and recognize the importance of having people, like having young kids out in green space and in
Hmm.
close proximity to water. So we do try to make the most of that for sure. And I think we're probably the only people in the Kawarthas that then like hightail it out of here as soon as it's nice out and go
Yes.
somewhere else. We're like, oh, see you later. When everyone else is arriving to cottage country.
Yeah.
But I think too, for the cabin for us or for tripping for us, it's also when we actually can focus on being a family. And I say that like we have a lot of wonderful family time and we do prioritize spending time together at home, but life gets busy. And at least when we're up there, we aren't distracted by our phones or the news. I mean, we've got CBC radio maybe going in the background or something, but it's you are able to actually sit and engage with one another and connect with the land in a different way than you would potentially if you were at home.
Yeah.
And I hope it's something that we're always able to do. And to be honest, like sometimes waking up there and just being able to sit and not do anything is nice too, right? Like to know that it is a removal. There's always little tasks, of course, on these places, and I'm sure that both you and Jim keep really busy in terms of like whether it's processing wood or getting water or whatever. But those are those enjoyable pieces,
Hmm.
and just being able to be together and watching the kids enjoy it and watching them grow and engage with being outside is pretty special. I'm not sure how much they get that yet, but we see
Yeah.
it anyway.
Yeah.
No.
What do you hope that your kids remember most about their childhood spent outdoors?
We see the benefits now, like when we watch them navigate uneven terrain or look at their balance or look at, what they call their talents, that
Hmm.
um, it's, it is different in that, Dylan can light a fire and use an axe. And that's something that was important to us, but I don't know in the grand scheme of other children, it doesn't always translate to other kids the same way for him. I think bigger than us, it's hopefully a connection to natural spaces and the desire to protect them and care for
Hmm.
them for many generations. And we've been very, very fortunate to be able to have our kids be on the land since before they were born and are really close to Alex, who you guys also know, who's taught our family so much about the importance of being connected to the natural world and what that looks like and the importance for future generations. And he's taught them some incredible skills, whether it's like trapping or fishing or even just looking at the land differently. And so I do hope that part of them will continue to care for the environment and be those environmental stewards for future generations, because I think that we need it. And then also that resilience that develops and that confidence that comes from knowing yourself as a physical being as well as that emotional being of
Hmm.
recognizing your needs, being able to advocate, caring for one another, like watching the two of them interact and how they're able to care for each other. The first time Jude did her first portage unassisted and wasn't in my backpack, that was like that was a very emotional moment for me. And it was
Yeah.
going from Lady Evelyn Lake into Diamond Lake, and she's starting to walk her first portage.
Yeah.
And there's Dylan who just walks back and takes her hand and walks
Oh,
her through her first portage. And it's just like, oh my God.
yeah.
So I think those moments of just hoping, and seeing that for young people, there there is hope
Hmm. Yeah.
for the future. I know that sounds really silly, but just um, we we tend to protect the things that we care about, right? So if we can help them develop some sort of connection to the land and the natural world, the hope is that they'll be able to move on and care for that, um, and learn to appreciate that and prioritize being with their family. Um, I think and to see us as sometimes like outside of being their parents as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's all very beautiful, and I agree wholeheartedly with we do protect the things we care about, and see and just knowing about even just with your camp and the canoe trips that these kids are going on are going to hopefully take on caring for the land going forward, because there's a lot of unknowns right now, and the future looks a little scary. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's really, really important that they feel that connection to the land.
Mhm.
So thank you for the work that you're doing. If you have one piece of advice for, I want to say moms specifically with young kids who are looking to get outside, if you have one piece of advice for them, what would it be?
I think try not to be hard on yourself with what you're trying to provide, and know that you're the most important thing to your kids. And so having time with you being present in the outdoors in whatever capacity that looks like is going to be valuable for your kids. And just knowing that if you're able to be fully with them, that's all they're going to care about. They're, like you said earlier, they're not going to know how far you are, or you know, all the challenges that it took to get there. So yeah, like take small steps, use your community, like reach out to other women that are out there doing it with kids. And I think we're all hopefully pretty honest about the challenges and successes with it, and just yeah, focus on being able to take it one step at a time, I think. Is good. And not to be afraid to ask for help and be vulnerable in that, of like, maybe I don't know how to do this, because that's really important, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation that is too much, right? Because it is still risky what we do. Ask questions, seek out programs where if you're not able to do it, maybe people can help you with it, whether that's like a family camp program or a camp for the kids. And to be courageous in trying to do it, but know that you're a mom and you're enough, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you. And so if people want to follow along on your adventures with your kids, where can they go?
Camp Wanapate is where you can find us pretty much anytime. But we used to use a blog called At Home in the Bush on Facebook, where we logged, like, you could go back and see all of our previous trips of when the kids were little. And it includes things like some gear that we would take, a lot of food. We do cook over fires and use a reflector oven. So it's a lot of the food that we take. The gear, like our Ostrom packs that are just unbelievable. We travel with a Wanigan. So there's a lot of information there. And the trips that we've been on, even the kind of maps that we use and how we plan. So that's not as up to date now, because we haven't been out on bigger trips, but there's a lot of information. You can always reach us through that. And then Backcountry Babies is my Instagram, which is actually kind of, every time I look at it, I started that when they were babies, and now I'm like, oh my goodness, they are not babies anymore. So again, you can always reach out to me there. I'm always happy to answer questions and talk with anyone that has any ideas, or do something like this again, or hang out with mom sometime.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. I learned a lot, and it was really insightful to listen to. So I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tori. Anytime. Thanks for asking, and thanks for doing what you do and helping more folks get out there, and women and moms and female identifying people. I think it's really amazing. And yeah, it's a small community within Ontario, I think, when you start looking at those of us doing it. And so it's good to know that we can all be in touch with one another and support each other in doing it, because it makes a big difference.
Yes, big time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.